Thank you so much for having me. I am a mom, I'm a mother of 5, and a stand-up comedian. And yes, I've been traveling to war zones for the last 10 years to entertain the troops, telling them jokes. And when I go to these war zones, I eat and sleep and get shot at in Black Hawk helicopters where the soldiers eat and sleep. The only difference is that these soldiers are trained to survive a war zone. I have never even shot a water gun. But I must say, I'm a really quick learner. I can tell the difference between incoming and outgoing rocket fire. Incoming rocket fire has red tails and outgoing has blue tails. Or maybe it's the other way around, I can't remember. And I started going to war zones for the simplest of reasons. I love adventure, and I needed the gig. So I go, and I tell the soldiers jokes, and I hope to get them to smile and forget their stress and give them a change to their day. But what I never realized was how much going to war zones was going to change me. I have learned so much from the soldiers and from the victims of war. I learned about courage. Not the courage that we get from our strength, but the courage that we get from our vulnerability. The courage to let go of anger and hatred, and the courage to forgive. One day, I was in Afghanistan at Bagram Hospital, and I went and saw several patients there. You know, I saw the woman who was recovering from malaria next to the young man with the broken leg. And then I went and saw Todd, a 19-year-old specialist from New Jersey who had been hit by an IED. His face was melted and covered in toffee-colored ooze. A tube in his nose ran full of blood. He was missing his left leg, the tip of his nose, part of his ears, nearly all of his teeth, and most of his lips. I wasn't sure where to look or what to say. So Todd indicated to me with his eyes to sit down on the bed. And as I prepared to sit down on his hospital bed, on that stark, white, standard issue sheet, I noticed a pale gray box on his bed. And in that pale gray box was a Purple Heart, standard issue from the military for soldiers wounded or killed in the line of duty. And as I looked at that box, I thought, please God, take away the Purple Heart and give Todd back his face. I leaned in close to hear what Todd was saying, and it was mumbled at first. And he started to tell me, 19-year-old Todd, about how he was going to marry his high school sweetheart, Debbie, in August. They were planning on a church wedding. And as Todd told me his plans, I couldn't help but wonder, does Debbie know yet? Has he spoken to her? And how will Debbie react the first time she goes to kiss his young lips and they're no longer there? Traveling to war zones has changed the way I see the world. I can no longer hear a news report in Syria and not think about the thousands of victims of war and what that means, not only for the soldiers, but for the citizens. And this 10 years, it haunted me. So I go back home to Los Angeles with my 5 kids and my dog Daisy. And one day, I'm reading the Los Angeles Times, and I read this article about this woman in Darfur. And after over a decade of war in Darfur, she's telling the reporter that if the fighting would end, she could feed her family again, and her life would go back to normal, because her infant child was starving to death. And as I read that sentence, I realized I know something this woman doesn't, that her life is not going to go back to normal, because war doesn't end when the last bullet is fired. War continues to destroy lives long after the troops and the guns have been set down. And as I sat there reading the LA Times, my mouthy teenage daughter looked at me and she goes, "What are you crying about, Mom?" I'm like, "It's just so sad what goes on in the world and how people suffer." And she's like, Well, you just can't sit around crying about it. What are you going to do about it? And I'm thinking, well, what I really want to do is ground you. But I didn't. I let that question torture me all day long. What are you going to do about it, Mom? So the next morning, I woke up, and even though I'm a stand-up comic and have never even shot a home movie before, I thought, it's a generation after the war in Bosnia. And despite the fact that I've never shot a home movie, I'm going to make a documentary about women in the aftermath of war. This was my plan. So I got on a plane, no money for a crew, and I bought a Panasonic DVX 100A and a plane ticket, and I went to Sarajevo. A generation after the war, what really haunted me was there are parts of Bosnia that look like downtown Baghdad. Because like I said, I've been to Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Kosovo, Djibouti, Haiti after the earthquake. And I met the most amazing women. Because the other thing I've learned in all my travels is that women are the real peacekeepers of the world. Women change the way our world is structured. And so woman after woman, all age ranges, all religious backgrounds, all socioeconomic backgrounds, they said the same thing to me. Let's forgive and move on, because hating each other won't get us anywhere. And why do I have to hate my neighbor? They all talked about what it was like to live 4 years without electricity, running water, gas. What it was like for an entire family to eat an onion for 3 days. What it was like to go 4 years without shampoo or soap or toothpaste. But they always came back to, let's forgive and move on. There was only one man, I didn't interview him, but there's only one man in my documentary. Aren't these women amazing? His name was Tarek. And Tarek, he translated when I interviewed his mother, Nablita, 15 years after the war was over. I met Nablita on a warm spring day. She lives in Mostar. And as her son Tarek began to translate, he looked at the camera and he kissed his mom and he goes, "This is my mom, and I love my mom." She told me what all the other women had told me about what it was like to be hungry, to go without, to go day after day for 4 years wondering what's going to drop from the sky. And then I asked Tarek to ask his mother to tell me about her young son, Imitus. Imitus was born July 8th, 1995, just a few months before the Dayton Peace Accord was signed. And like all moms, she bragged about her son. She said how he always came home straight from school, did his homework. He was the best student in the school. And it made me think about my own boys. And now I have to bribe, threaten, and coerce them into doing their homework. She talked about how her son loved Eminem and video games. And again, I thought about my own boys. And I realized in that moment, we're just two moms talking about our kids. So I asked Tarek to translate for his mother and tell me what happened to Imitus on October 26, 2004, 9 years after the war was over. Imitus came home from school one day, did his chores and his homework right away, and he went outside to play with his best friend. They played in the area where they always played, an area that on the map was free and clear of landmines and munitions. But the map was wrong. On October 24th, 2005, Imitus' friend picked up a grenade that had been left in the rocks for 9 years. His friend died immediately. Imitus was so close behind that when his father got to him, he was still alive, but he lost too much blood on the way to the hospital. And that day, 9 years after the world had declared the war in Bosnia over, 2 young boys died, victims of war and hatred. I asked Nablita if she had any anger in her heart towards the people who had left the grenade behind. And as she looked at me, caressing the photograph of her young son, she said, I have only love and loss of a child. I have no room in my heart for hatred. But if there's anybody out there who can stop these things from happening, please help. And I want to propose to you today that we can all stop these things from happening, because we can change the world one story at a time, one conversation at a time, and one person at a time. And when we see violence and hatred and anger going on in the world, we need to raise our hands and have the courage to forgive and move on. Thank you very much.